Welcome to episode 25 of The Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. This week I speak to Paul Stewart, aka RTW Paul, a man who's ridden 1 million kilometers in the past 15 years alone. Paul talks street dogs, building choppers, retracing a 120-year-old route across America, and about his biggest challenge to date, nearly losing his eyesight. But before we dive in, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles in a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only and exclusions apply. Shall we take the plunge? Now, I saw on your website that you, and this number may be out of date and you can bring me up to date, but that you've traveled 410,000 kilometers on a motorcycle since 2011. Which seems
that's way out of date.
What's the number?
I'm probably closer to 1 million.
1 million kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
So what is riding for you? Is it pleasure? Is it compulsion? Because that number is so huge. I mean, I can't even fathom it. What is riding for you?
It's just something I just enjoy riding motorcycles. I mean, it really is as simple and benign as that. I just enjoy riding motorcycles. I've been around motorcycles since I was a little kid, and I just enjoy riding them. So I've owned motorcycle shops. I've built hundreds of motorcycles. I just get out and go and ride. And I just can't ride locally. I can't do the 5, 10, 15 mile ride. It just, to me, 100, 200, 300 miles is a short ride. And then once you're that far out, I just tend to not come back.
Now, I mean, you said that you ran bike shops, and a lot of people that work in the business, it's sort of, it kind of sullies their view of motorcycling. Sometimes it becomes, it's when work and pleasure overlap.
Right.
How have you managed to sidestep that?
I owned 3 motorcycle shops. I used to build one-off custom motorcycles, very high-end stuff. I used to build about 100 bikes a year. I had a shop with 12 guys working in it. And the types of bikes that I rode weren't suitable to go down the roads that I wanted to go down. So that, in a way, kind of enticed me to ride, but not on the bikes that I built, even though I didn't ride those. And then I sold the business, and then didn't really touch motorcycles besides my own for. Well, that was back in 2007. I sold that, and I hadn't really worked in a motorcycle shop again until the start of this year when I started working for Takemoto. And chatting with Mike, who owns the company, asked me if I could get the side of his business going to build adventure bikes, very lightweight Austrian single adventure bikes. And I built a couple of dozen of those, and then I'm kind of fulfilling other people's dreams. And it just got to the point where I was just like, you know what, I need to just get back out on the road and just go ride myself. So there's lots of different angles, I would say, of what makes me want to go and ride. But it's just a love of a motorcycle, in basic terms.
What kind of bikes were you building when you had
one high-end one-off customs? I used to average my bike. I mean, this is back in the early 2000s. My bikes used to average about $50,000 a piece.
So you're building choppers?
Building choppers, yeah. Choppers, bobbers, pro streets, yeah.
Now, that was in the height of the sort of Orange County chopper, West Coast chopper phase.
I was doing it way before all of that. Way before it. That just kind of grew around me. I mean, the shops were popping up absolutely everywhere. And the closest shop to me popped up 150 yards away. And they went out of business a couple of years later. But yeah, shops were popping up all that. according to a few magazines, I was one of the most prolific custom bike shops in the world. I was putting out that many bikes. More bikes than, you mentioned Orange County Choppers, more than them, more than Jesse James, more than probably the next half dozen shops combined. And it was just because I enjoyed being around motorcycles. I didn't get into the business to go into, I'm not going to say mass production, but bigger production levels. But more and more customers just kept walking through the door and handing me money. So I just kept going and going, and one thing led into another, and it grew and it grew. Another shop.
We'll get to adventure riding in a minute, but I'm fascinated by the sort of the arc of the chopper movement, and it kind of it really had its moment, didn't it? Because it seemed like every corporation, had a raffle for a chopper. I knew a guy who all of a sudden was building them in his shed, and then he had 5 guys working for him overnight practically, and it kind of went crazy. And I mean, what do you make of that moment now that it's sort of 20 years or 15 years behind us?
Well, if you look at it, if you look at the chopper situation, I mean, prior to that, it was hot rods. Then it went into choppers. Then it transitioned into, I would say, big, heavy adventure bikes, and now it's transitioned into lightweight adventure bikes. So it was just wherever the money was at the time, and the money at that time was it was in those type of bikes, and it was funny to watch it grow, because I mean, I was doing it from the early '90s, and it was just a regular income. It was just a job I just enjoyed doing. It was a regular income. Then all of a sudden, it was just like somebody just flicked a light switch, and all of a sudden, every single person wanted a custom motorcycle. Yeah. And the corporations, like I said, they wanted them. I think I built one bike for a corporation. That was it. It wasn't my thing. The theme bikes, again, not my thing. TV shows, I turned down multiple TV shows because they wanted to take over your shop, and they said, "Oh, it'll be great advertising, and we'll get you going, and you'll be busier and bigger than ever." And I just, what? For you to take over my shop for a month, then I have to piss off 15 or 20 customers. So I don't want to do that. That you're not going to replace that. And I was in 2 or 3 magazines a month, literally every single month, all over the world. I had more than enough. I never advertised once, so it was strange. It was strange, and I think it killed itself. It was kind of overpopulation. So, but it was good. It was fun. It was fun while it lasted. But
what do you make of the current chopper scene? Because I find it really curious, because I grew up in a town in the 70s, and there was a local, Satan's Choice was the local bike club. And it was all panhead and shovelhead choppers. And now if you look at a show like Born Free, or a lot of these shows, especially Born Free, it's like they're note perfect. In fact, sometimes you'll be online, you see a photograph of a knucklehead and a panhead, and you'll think, oh, this must be a period photograph. And then you'll see like a Toyota Prius in the background. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's kind of gone right back, hasn't it?
I mean, people are, they want to go retro, and what it's done, it's the people that, to me, is the people that really love those bikes, the older guys that grew up around those bikes and love those bikes. Now they can't afford them, because the hipsters have jumped in with all their money, and it's either that or it's the other way around. It's garage built stuff that I look at, and I've been to a bunch of these shows, and they're kind of 10-foot bikes. They look great from 10 foot away, but when you start looking closer to them, I mean, some of them are scary. They're really scary. They were just built for a look, and trying to take things to unnecessary extremes. I mean, not saying that I didn't as well, but some of the extremes they're going to nowadays, like just one side of handlebars and that kind of thing. It's just to me is weird. I mean, but it's an art form, and you take the art form in the direction that you want to, and if people follow, then that becomes the norm. So I'm kind of glad I'm not in it now. It's not the way things have gone. It's not the way I like to build bikes. So
we've gone from building motorcycles that had a very high sort of style quotient to them, and now the bikes that I've seen on your website, and we'll get into this now, which is lightweight, capable ADV bikes, and one of the things that always interests me is I was looking at some photographs of the new 1300 GS Adventure. And I've had apartments that were smaller than that motorcycle, and yet most people who do something with passion like you do have sort of an outlook or have a vision of what they think is the perfect, in this case, the perfect vehicle to do what you want to do. What's the perfect travel? You've ridden more than most of us will ever ride. What's the perfect motorcycle for you to ride now, the way you ride now?
But the funny thing is I don't get obsessed by a single motorcycle or a single brand. I get on a motorcycle to take me to the places that I want to go in the type of riding that I want to do. So I change bikes all the time. I mean, riding around the world, I've probably gone through 12 or 13 different bikes. So, and I mean, now, I just sold a KTM 500, which is what a lot of people are going to. Allegedly, a lot of people are going to because I was riding it. But I've kind of worn that out. I like to try something different. So at the moment, I have a Yamaha T7, and I have a right behind wherever it is, that shoulder, the other shoulder, that shoulder. Because the camera's the wrong way around.
I know it's the wrong way around. It's a test.
Yeah, the red thing behind me is a postie bike, which is, I've ridden the big 1200s, and I've never been a BMW owner. That's never appealed to me in the slightest. I rode one for about 2 miles once, and I could not wait to get off it. Hated it in 2 miles.
Was it the boxer engine that rubbed you the wrong way?
The boxer engine and the way that it moves, and where the extreme heavy weight, and it just didn't appeal to me. I mean, each to their own, but to me, no. So like I say, to me, it's just the bike is only a small part of the journey. And you enjoy the journey in different ways. Sometimes I might enjoy it that I want to go fast. Sometimes might be on freeways, other times on back roads, other times on graded dirt roads, other times hard enduro, other times on tiny roads, the old forgotten highways and things like that. At the moment, that's kind of where I'm at. So the last, well, actually not the last long trip, the second to last long trip I did was on a CT 125. I rode around 48 states, had an absolute blast. And then, ironically, the next long ride that I did, I followed George Wyman, who was the first guy to ride coast to coast. It was the first motorized vehicle, and he was on a 125, but I did it on a T7. But I followed a route that was primarily a small bike route. You get to a point where you ride so much, you need. For me, what I wanted to have a new experience on a motorcycle, and I never owned a scooter when I was a kid, so it was the only type of bike that I hadn't ridden. I've ridden choppers and baggers and big adventure bikes, and I say dirt bikes and lightweight adventure bikes. The only thing I hadn't ever owned was a small low single-digit horsepower bike. So I got one just to have a different experience.
How does a different kind of motorcycle change the nature of a trip? So if you're going to do the same trip, and we're going to get into the George Wyman thing in a moment, because I find that really interesting. So we'll get there in a second. But just before we leave this, to do the same trip on a 125, and to do this, and then on a 700, say, how does it change the experience for you as the rider? Beyond the obvious, obviously there's speed difference. You can't go on the interstate on a 125. At least it isn't advisable. But beyond that, do you have any thoughts on that?
The best way I would look at it is, if you do a lot of long distance riding, the people that you see a lot of, funny, you see more of than people on motorcycles once you leave the country, is people on bicycles. And if you end up stopping and talking to them, they see so much more because they're going slower and they can stop easier and things like that. So the smaller the bike is, you have that same thing. The only thing is missing is the pedaling. You don't have to pedal. So you're going a little quicker than they are, but you're seeing a lot more. You're more inside of the moment the slower you go. And it's more interactive when you stop as well, because people have asked questions like, why this? Why aren't you riding a big BMW like Ewan McGregor? That kind of thing. And just because I've done that, and it wasn't as enjoyable. And then the restrictions are a lot less. I can fit in more places. I can, if I drop the bike, it's easy to pick up. It's that kind of thing. So it becomes more of an adventure. The smaller the bike is, and then you just take it in completely different ways. Every adventure is great, but when you've done it a lot, you're looking for I wouldn't say the next best thing, but it probably is looking for the next best thing, looking for something different. So for me, I'm always looking for a different outlet, a different way to get from A to B.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. This week's Fireside Chat is about the joy of going slow. Our guest Paul crossed America on a Honda 125. And while I've not crossed the continent on a little bike, I've driven thousands of miles in a very slow car. Perhaps the most legendarily slow car ever made, a VW bus. Mine's from 1977, and it's got the big block, a full 2,000 cc of air-cooled might, pumping out a claimed 67 horsepower. And what's interesting about traveling in a slow vehicle is that everyone on the road either does one of two things. They either wave and smile because, of course, it's yellow, or they get angry because they know you're slow and you're going to get in their way. I've been driving on 3 and 4 lane highways in the right-hand lane at the speed limit and had people come up and get behind me and toot the horn. Like, where am I supposed to go? Into the ditch, which, of course, they'd like me to. But it's very relaxing because you're no longer, in the passing lane, dicing it out, over the limit. You just kind of settle in and you drive and your mind has time to wander. And it's incredibly relaxing. And I get everywhere about 15 minutes behind everyone else. And I'm extremely relaxed when I get there. Now, across America on a 125, now that's a long way. But maybe it's something I should think about. And now a word from our sponsor. With over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, and naturally, exclusions apply. Now back to my conversation with Paul Stewart. You're listening to The Lowdown, presented by advrider.com and sponsored by ebaymotors.com. So a man named George Wyman took a coast-to-coast ride about 120 years ago. I believe you recreated this route in the 120th anniversary of it.
Yeah.
Who was George Wyman and what did he do? Let's start there.
George Wyman was a guy that lived in California, just outside of San Francisco. He was a mechanic, an engineer of sorts, a handyman of sorts. Loved bicycles. He was one of, if not the first people to circumnavigate Australia. Enjoyed it so much, then he started getting into more bicycle racing and road riding. And then when the motors came in and they started adding motors to bicycles, so he wasn't on a motorcycle, he was on a motorized bicycle. He would go to various events in Central California, and he would ride there, ride the race, and then ride home. And from one article I read, somebody said to him, well, you should ride that thing across the country. And that kind of sparked an idea. And he got in touch with a magazine, a defunct magazine now called The Motorcyclist, and threw the idea at them, and they said they would publish whatever that he would throw at them. So he tried to figure out a route to go coast to coast. And
Coast to coast in the U.S.
Coast to coast from San Francisco to New York. It had never been done with any motorized vehicle whatsoever. This is prior to Harley Davidson releasing their first motorcycle. This is prior to any car going coast to coast.
What year did he do it in, Paul?
In 1903, he started in, I believe it was May 1903. So cars hadn't gone coast to coast because there wasn't basically a road network. The first plane hadn't flown. The Wright brothers still hadn't flown their plane. Ford Motor Company hadn't been incorporated yet. So, there was nothing out there. Trains were out there, and if you wanted to go to coast, you could do it on a train, and it would take you about 5 days. And he took up the challenge. And here's the crazy thing. I was riding around the country on my little postie bike, on my little 125, and stopped in a motorcycle shop in Missoula, Montana, to get some oil. And there was a poster on the wall of George Wyman, and I'd never heard of this guy before. So this was in 22. And I took a photo of it, carried on my ride, forgot all about it. And the end of the ride, I'm flipping through the photos, trying to find a photo of something random from, like a new Honda 125. And I came across this poster, and I sat down and I started doing the research. And I just thought that would be a different ride, something interesting, a different ride. So at the time I was living in Phoenix, and I left from Phoenix and rode up to San Francisco and took off and did it on his 120th anniversary.
Now, there's a lot of riders have recreated routes. Like the standard one is the Persigs, the route he took from Minnesota to the West Coast for the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is one. In fact, Mark Richardson, a friend of mine, wrote a book about it called Zen and Now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sometimes fascinated by when riders or photographers recreate photographs. Like, I know there's a guy that recreates Ansel Adams photographs in Yosemite.
Mm-hmm.
What are you looking for in recreating a route? What are you trying to get out of it?
I was just intrigued with the route and see how much of it was rideable, and actually hardly any of it is rideable, because basically the route that he took was it was the railroad route, and it was the service road that was next to the railroad that actually was turning into the Lincoln Highway. So he was doing this prior to Route 66 even being thought of. So the Lincoln Highway was the coast-to-coast route that they were planning to make, but it didn't exist. So he would jump on the railroad tracks when there wasn't any pathway to go, and when there was, he would go back on. He would go back on the pathway that they brought the tooling and the equipment and the supplies for the railroad. And I just wanted to see what was left. I mean, I've lived off and on. I've lived in the States since '87, but I'm from England originally, and America has history, but it doesn't have a lot of history in too much depth. So I was looking to see, this was something that was potentially you could recreate and follow history. And it was the biggest scavenger hunt ever, because I had about 30 of his photos. And then prior to leaving, I was researching from photos from within a year or two of his travels that were along his exact route, and then go and see if I could find that same location, and trying to pick out shapes of windows in a line of buildings, trying to pick out the way a railroad track went off into the distance and a mountain range and things like that. So it was just intriguing, and as a photographer, it was fun trying to find it. And I found quite a few of the places that he went. Very few of them exist anymore. It might be a pile of bricks or a dilapidated building, but it was just the distances that I was going between places was. I mean, I'm on a 700cc motorcycle, and I did the trip. The trip took me longer in 2023 than it would have taken me in 1903 on a train. And I was riding a 700cc motorcycle, and with all the highway network, even though I was riding his route and following 160 waypoints, it still took me 6.5 days to go coast to coast.
How long did it take him originally on this trip?
It took him 50 something days. So he did it in 50, I forget, I think it was maybe 53 or 56 days. About a week or two after he left, a car headed out to do the same thing. And it took them a couple of weeks longer, but they got a lot more press. And then the Wright brothers flew their plane, and George Wyman just disappeared. He didn't become part of history. He just completely vanished until people started to research him about 30 or so years later. So it was. I think it's a ride that a lot of people would enjoy. The parts that I can tell you people will not enjoy is the coming out of Chicago going towards Gary, Indiana, because the traffic is horrific.
Yeah.
But besides that, because the section that he rode around there is all freeways. But besides that, it was a really nice, leisurely ride with amazing scenery. I met a couple in Wyoming on the ride. I was camping in the middle of nowhere by this lake, and the couple showed up in a truck with a couple of dogs. And I'm chatting to them, and they were asking me what I was doing, and I told them. And the woman said, "Yeah, he didn't come here." I was like, "No, this is back in 1903. This is, she was an older lady, but I went, even if you were alive back then, you wouldn't remember." And she went, "No, my parents were the founders of this town, and there's only maybe 200 people in this little town in Wyoming." And I said, "Well, maybe they met him because he broke down here and he was here for a couple of days." And she said, "My grandparents never mentioned him." And she said, "Here's the thing, we have a little museum, and I work in the museum 1 or 2 days a week, and there's no mention of him in the museum." And I pulled out my phone and I showed her a photo of the railroad station, which is now the museum. And I went, "That's his bike leaning against the railroad station." And she just started crying. She couldn't believe she didn't know history of her own town, and she'd lived there for about 80 years.
You must have gained an incredible appreciation of what he accomplished, because, I mean, even riding coast to coast now, is yes, you can make it fairly easy, but it's still a long, San Francisco to New York is still a long way. It's not any shorter than it was 125 years ago. So there's that. But a motorized bicycle in 1903, I mean, it's kind of crazy, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to fathom that someone could even do it. I mean, most of us would at that time would have got 25 miles into it and think, oh Christ, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And turn around and got home.
Well, he had those thoughts himself, and he, it's only 120 years ago, but he was chased by Indians. He was shot at. He was, towns that he went into that people didn't know what a bicycle was. Some people had never seen a bicycle. Then he turned the motor on, and they'd never heard that sound. He was scaring cattle, and ranchers were chasing him off, and so it was. It's only 120 years ago. I mean, it's a crazy adventure, and if you ride the Lincoln Highway coast to coast, most of it is pretty much the same as it was back then. There's settlements. You can't even call them towns. They're settlements of a couple of dozen buildings, and they're 20, 50, 100 miles apart. Which on a high horsepower motorcycle you can get between in minutes or a half hour, an hour or so. It was taking him days and days and days. He was stopping at stagecoach houses. They were still running stagecoaches coast to coast, because in some cases it was quicker to get on a stagecoach than it was to get on a train. So he was stopping and sleeping where they were feeding the horses, and the passengers were swapping from one stagecoach to another, that kind of thing. It's wild when you think it's only just over 100 years ago. So as adventure, so many people now think they're an adventure rider. He was the first.
If George Wyman was the first adventure rider, and I think it sounds like there's a valid argument for that. What do you make of the current ADV scene? And I'll preface this by saying that there's a bit of a kickback against the whole overlanding movement, and I think the criticism, as it's been relayed to me, is that people are. The overlanding is sort of a movement that's been sort of engineered by corporations to sell us fancy stuff. I mean, some of the I live a few hours north of Toronto, and I've got a VW bus, which suits me. But you'll see these wild vehicles, and everyone has a ladder, a Sprinter, converted Sprinter with a ladder in the roof, and bicycles and kayaks and canoes, and I mean, it looks like they're going to war. And this is a new thing, and I mean, what do you make of the whole, not just motorcycles, but the whole sort of notion that overlanding is now this, it seems like an economic driver or something?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think it's got to the point where so many people think that they can make a living from it, and because of that, then more people think they can make a living from it, and
Are you referring to sort of Instagram influencers and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I have a reasonable following on Instagram, but it's just because I was just sharing photos. I like to share photos of, let people see some of the places and things that I get to see that they would never get to see, and it's just this overland movement is bizarre. I remember going to Overland Expo when it was in Mormon Lake, and there was, maybe 1,000 people showed up. Now when you go, there's probably 1,000 vendors, 30, 40, 50,000 people go through there. And it's scary. I appreciate people want to go out and see stuff and do things. People have more money now than more disposable income, and they want to spend it in a certain way, and I think it's great, but I think it's been taken to excess, and I think it's. We were talking earlier about custom motorcycles and things like that. I think this is the next step, that a certain age group of people went from, hot rods and custom bikes, and they went into adventure bikes, and now they're tailing off and they're going into, because they have the money, they're going into these big overland rigs. But the younger generation is skipping all the other stuff and just going straight to the overland rigs. And it's good and it's bad. I'm not gonna cast an opinion on it, because anybody and everybody can do what they want. But it's just it's bizarre to me, the amount of, like you say, rigs that are built out that you see driving around in metropolitan areas that are never going to go anywhere. It's just for the image, just for the look. It's wild. I remember riding through years ago. I was going to see a friend in New York, and I'd just ridden the Trans-America Trail from west to east, and went through Manhattan because it was the most direct route to get there. And I stopped at a light, and a car pulled up next to me, and I'm still dirty. I haven't washed my riding gear. I haven't washed my bike. It's still covered in mud from riding in Pennsylvania. And a guy stopped next to me, and he said, "You should wash your bike." And I said, "Well, I will do when I get to where I'm going." He said, "Where are you going?" I told him. He said, "Well, where did you come from?" And I said, "Oregon." And he went, "Yeah, but where did you start your ride?" And I said, "I started in Oregon. I rode dirt roads from Oregon to here." And he just looked at me like I was an alien. He was like, I can't believe that's even a possibility. And I went, "Yeah, it is. It is." But driving along through Manhattan, overland vehicles, nice and shiny, big tires, and they were looking at me. And the funny thing is, it's the guy that's in a Mercedes is the guy that asked the question. The guy that's in his Sprinter or his Jeep or whatever, that's got all the gear on his bike, on his vehicle, is the one that turns off. That looks, you catch their eye and they turn away
because they've been busted.
They've been busted. Yeah. So all I would say is, if you're going to do it, if you're going to build something that looks like it can go anywhere, remote, go do it. Otherwise, what's the point?
You're listening to The Lowdown, presented by advrider.com and sponsored by ebaymotors.com. Your journey as an individual motorcyclist hasn't necessarily been that smooth, and I was reading that you've had a number of eye surgeries, so it's not like you've just been out gallivanting nonstop.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your health thing, and because you think eyes to a motorcyclist are everything, and you've been through a bit of an ordeal.
If you cringe about things, you might want to stick your fingers in your ears for the first part. When I was a kid, the age is a bit vague, maybe 4, 5, 6 years old. I was at home, and for whatever reason, I had a knife. And for whatever other reason, I was cutting a piece of string, and I put the knife in the string, and I cut the piece of string, and I stabbed myself in my left eye. And I cut my left eye in half. I obviously knew it had happened, and I pulled the knife out, and my mother walked in the room seconds later, and I told her what I did, and they rushed me to the hospital, and who knows how, but my eye fused together perfectly, and I had perfect vision.
Wow.
Until I was until 2007. 2007, I was selling my business, and the sale didn't go too well. and I had a stress-related stroke and went 100% blind. And I was 100% blind for a short time.
In
And
your
I
left eye.
had,
In your left eye.
no, in both eyes.
In both eyes.
In both eyes. I had what's called an ocular migraine. So instead of having a migraine that causing pain in your head, an ocular migraine cuts off your vision. So stress-related, stroke, ocular migraine together. I went in rush hour traffic as well. Luckily, I was in the truck and I knew where I was, and I just turned the wheel and slammed on the brakes and stopped. It took me about 3 or 4 months for me to get my eyesight back, and it came back, I would say, about 98, 99%, something like that. I had every test done, MRI, CT scans. I had neurologists checking me, blood tests. I had everything done. And my sight came back. Then I was good for about 10 years. I was riding in Ecuador. I was up by Chimborazo in Ecuador, which is the closest point to the sun on the planet. So it's closer to the sun than the peak of Everest. Not the highest place on the planet, but so everybody knows that the Earth isn't perfectly round, it's more elliptical shape. Because of that, the pressure up there is more intense. So the eye pressure is more intense. I came back into Quito a couple of days later, and I walked into a supermarket, and it was like I was walking into fog. And the person I was with, I said to them, "Is it misty in here, or is it me?" And they went, "No, it's not misty at all." And it was the strangest thing. It was almost like looking through a fairy tale kind of mist. So I went to see an eye specialist in Quito, and he said a lot of people have this problem that the air is very dry and the pressure is pretty intense. And if you're not used to it, what it does, it makes the lenses of your eyes stick together. And he said, "Now I'll give you some drops, and it's a steroid, and it makes those lenses pop apart, and everything will be good. Use them for a couple of weeks." Went to get the drops, used them for a couple of weeks, everything was good. So that was 2018. 2023, end of 2022, 2023, I started getting the same thing again. It was like I was looking through a haze. Went to see an eye specialist, and he said, "Yeah, you have," and he told me, I don't remember what all the things were called, but basically what the eye doctor had explained in Ecuador. And he said, "Have you taken anything for it?" And I told him, and he said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I would prescribe. The problem with that is it magnifies other problems, and the other problems are cataracts." And he said, "You combine that with what you have, then you have this blurred vision." So I had about a 70% section of my view out of my left eye was completely blurred and hazy. So he said to me, "Yeah, you might want to get this operated on." And I was okay. I said, "Well, I am actually planning to leave to go and pick up my motorcycle." And this was in Phoenix at the time, Phoenix, Arizona. I'm planning to go and pick up my motorcycle because it's been shipped to Chile, and I'm going to ride from Chile back to Arizona. And he went, "Well, go do that ride. Take it easy. If there's any eye issues at all, I would suggest you get back here as soon as you can because you need that operation. But if you're talking 6 or 8 months or something like that," which I was going to do a pretty fast ride. Then he said, "You'll be okay." So I flew down to Chile, went to get my bike, and within an hour or two of getting my bike, my eyesight started to fail. So I went back to the shipper and I said, "I need to ship my bike." And he was like, yeah. And he didn't understand what I was saying. He went, "Yeah, you're good. You don't need anything." I went, "No, I need to ship my bike to America." And he was like, no, the bike, you're going to ride to America." No, I'm having a problem with my eyesight. Can you ship my bike? So I literally put it back in the same crate that I took it out of. I flew back to the States and the end of January 23, I went to see eye specialists, and between January 23 and now, which if it's not dated, so now is the middle of September 24, I've had 18 different operations and eye surgeries, procedures, and what have you. Now on both eyes, because now it's affecting both eyes. And my vision now, I have to wear glasses now full time, but my vision now is back to about I would say about 98, 99% of what it was when I'm wearing the glasses. But over the last year and a half, that made me not want to ride a motorcycle or not have the ability to ride a motorcycle. And the problem was if I tried it a few times and I'm riding, I was riding my 500 and I'm riding on reasonably extreme dirt roads, my pupils wouldn't adjust quick enough to see if I'm going in rough terrain to see the difference and be able to pick out the undulations. And I had a few very close calls that could have been pretty bad.